Welcome back to Tech Talks. I'm your host, Jab Brownwood, and this is the podcast where I speak to some of the brightest and most influential people in the tech industry in the UK. This week, I sit down with the head of development at Culture Shift, Chris Northwood. Our conversation ranges from the aggressive growth plans over at Culture Shift, the book she authored, and how their platform deals with the important problem of bullying in the workplace.
People give the best if they feel safe at work. People are most creative when they feel safe at work and they feel in a team. So can you build that safe workspace by being really brave and tackling bullying, harassment that you'd rather didn't exist, but have to accept it does.
For more information on this episode and Tech Talks, head over to tact-it.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. Hi, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, yeah. So I always like to start these things, and it's a very philosophical question, but who is Chris Northwood?
Who is Chris Northwood? It's a very philosophical question. I've not been prepped for it. So I'm a trans woman. So that's kind of, came out about 18 months ago. I work for Culture Shift. I'm the head of development there. So I originally joined them as a freelancer, and then when they did their venture capital raise, I was given the opportunity to build a team. So I've been there now about 3.5 years, 2.5 years permanent, helping them build a team. And before that, kind of did the whole very classic way into software engineering. I did computer science at University at York, did a master's at Sheffield, did a little bit of out in industry, and then came back, moved to Manchester to work for the BBC on their graduate scheme. So I did the graduate scheme, spent a few years there, left, went back, and then eventually left. And now I'm ended up where I am here at Culture Shift.
Amazing. Are you from Yorkshire originally?
Yeah, I grew up in Doncaster.
And Donny.
Yeah, Donny. Yeah, so then I kind of Donny, York, Sheffield. And I spent a couple of years in Oxford, which I did like. Oxford's a nice small city, but I thought, the north's drawing me back. Have to move back up north. So I ended up in Manchester, and definitely that right moment when that tech scene is like really, really growing, kind of about 2010, 2011. So yeah.
Yeah, you picked an amazing time, surely. Yeah. And now head of development, obviously at Culture Shift. And I did give you pre-warning about this, but as any great story has a beginning, could you draw a picture of what you wanted to be when you were growing up?
Absolutely. I mean, what I wanted to be when I was growing up was very generic and unsurprising.
Okay.
So when I was young, I really wanted to move to Japan and make video games. Basically, I wanted to go work for Nintendo because that was what I wanted to do. So me and my brothers, we would sit down and would play on our N64, and that is the world's worst N64 controller. But you remember the sticky out bit. You kind of connected to, and it was obviously one of these big old tellies back in the time. So that was me when I was younger. So yeah, so I wanted to go and make games. I remember once me and my friends at school, we thought, we're going to go make a video game, and one of my friends sketched some like characters, and we had like some level design and that kind of stuff, and then it was up to me to code it. And then turns out coding video games is really hard. I think if it was now, so this was like in the 90s, early noughties kind of thing, where you got all these great tools like Unity and all this kind of stuff. I might have taken my career a different path, but we had this great idea, and obviously this is like 13, 14 year olds wanted to make a video game. But yeah, that's what I really what I wanted to do. Kind of had this vision of it'd be really cool with all the cool technology and all that kind of stuff. But wow. Yeah.
So you were a techie from the get-go.
Pretty much, yeah. I was as stereotypical as it came. My dad was always a little bit of a geek, which is really nice. So we had the BBC Micro. You're younger than me, aren't you? So you won't remember that.
The BBC Micro. No, wait, I think I do.
Yeah, it was. You turned it on, and it turned on like that. It went beep, and it was ready to go. And it was just like a little command prompt, and you only had text. There was no mouse, no video. So you typed in 10, print hello world, 20 go to 10, and it would just print hello world over and over and over again. And you kind of got into it because you had to code to know it, and it could have just been as simple as you had to write one line of code, which was load this game from this disk, which is the thing most people know, is like star load. But then that's how I got into coding. I was like, I could make the computer make pretty shapes and print out things and do what I want it to do. And that was really, really exciting. And then kind of moved to being online. I was very online as a kid. We had 56k modem. It was allowed to go on for 2 hours a night with free serve. Apart from when my dad was on call, and he had to keep the telephone free for whole weekends. I wasn't allowed to go online. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Chat with my friends, and then we used this thing called IRC, which was a little bit like Discord is today. It's like a kind of group chat, kind of mostly like on gaming and that kind of stuff, kind of scenario. And we made like little programs, little bots that would connect to IRC and play games against each other, like using to slap each other with fish and like things like that. Well, that was kind of how I got into coding. It's like it's just really fun and passion, and made my career out of it.
Wow, I love that. And were you in quite a traditional route then, I guess, into?
Absolutely, yeah. So 15 years I was getting into the industry. Like 20 years I was kind of finishing my A-level, or finished my GCSEs about 20 years ago. So yeah, so at the time, like a lot of these routes that exist now, NVQs, as well as like the like slightly less formal routes, like the boot camps now, and although some of those boot camps obviously are accredited as part of a formal education thing, they just didn't exist back then. It was either you go to university and do computer science, or you go and do an NVQ in like computer repair and get into computer support. And often, like a lot of self-taught people would get into the industry through things like doing computer support and doing help desk, and then moving into like programming type roles from there, so kind of going from entry level. But yeah, there was not the whole range of ways into the industry as there are today. So it's really great that there is multiple ways in, especially for people who want to change career later in life, because you can't always go back to university and do a 3-year degree, can you? So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the people coming in now, they have so much life experience as well under the belt. It's got to be helpful for development teams, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If a good development team is not one full of people that just get their heads down and write code, because you have to know how to write code. Code's really important, but you have to know that the code is solving the right problem. And if you kind of live in this little silo, then you're not going to do that. You have to like understand what your customers are doing, understand what your users are doing, and have that kind of that real world experience. Obviously, what we're doing at Culture Shift, which is we're building want to build a safe, happy, and supportive world of work and study for everyone, everywhere. We do that for our product, which gives people who've experienced bullying, harassment, and potentially more serious things such as sexual assault on university campuses and in workplaces, the ability to speak up about what's happened to them and access support. You have to do that with empathy. When you're building our software, you have to really understand that. And we actually have quite a few members of staff who have experienced things like bullying, harassment in their work experience, and they can bring that part of their experience to work as well as their technical skills. And that's a really important part. And we get all this feedback from our customers and our users saying, this is such a great piece of software. It works really well for us, and that's because we understand that, as well as obviously having a really good product research team in place to kind of help us build that. So bringing that experience has really helped us. And I think there was it used to be in the early days of the industry, the best products were made by people who are passionate about the area you work in. So you might get, for example, a legal tech startup where it's a lawyer who has worked in that area. It's like, I've just got this problem I need to solve, and surely there's this gap in the market, and they go and find it and they build it. And that's kind of how a lot of startups are founded, and that's because you have that passion and you have that experience, and you can bring it to it. You can't just build the tech; you have to build the product and get the people in.
God, that's so true. I mean, I speak to a lot of founders. I mean, we had one on the podcast not long ago, a fellow called Tom Dunlop from Surmise, and that was his whole thing. He was a lawyer and found a gap in the market, and now he owns a business called Surmise, and they like do contract management. But he's so passionate about it. You can tell when he's speaking to people. What about Culture Shift? Where did the idea for Culture Shift come from? I know you've been there for 2
So I've been there for about 3.5 years.
3.5.
Since I started working in this. Culture Shift's got a really interesting journey. It's probably not the traditional startup journey. So there was a digital marketing and branding agency called Trust that the founders were working for, also ran. And they got given a contract by Manchester University as one of their pre-existing clients, off the back of a report that had been published by Universities UK and the NUS about ways to reduce violence against women and girls and sexual harassment on campuses. And one of the ideas was kind of the core principles, like how can you reduce barriers to reporting? Someone who's experienced something quite serious, having to relive that experience can be quite traumatic. So how do you make it as easy as possible for, say, this is something that's happened to me, how can I access support? And this report came up with this idea of anonymous reporting. So you can just share what's happened to you, and not necessarily, won't necessarily lead to any action being taken because it's kind of an anonymous allegation, but it can help an institute gain a really good understanding of what the real picture is inside their organisation. Because most people who have experienced these kind of things just don't report it. They don't know how to go to. They don't trust anything will happen. So can you kind of remove those barriers? Anonymous reporting was the solution. So Manchester University asked the agency, can you build this website for us? The agency approached it like a very traditional agency project, and then Manchester University said, we think some other universities are going to come want this. Will you do it for us for mates rates, but you get to keep the IP and maybe go select some other universities? Obviously, slightly different from the normal agency build, because the agency kept the IP. So the co-founders includes Jeremy McCall, who's kind of our CEO now, and who's herself experienced maternity-related discrimination in her work. So this is something that's really close and passionate to her. So we took it out, and the moment we launched with Manchester University, 2 or 3 of the universities came knocking, and they said, right, can we have this as well, please? So they decided to kind of spin out Culture Shift from the agency and focus on growing that side of the business. I was brought on, I think the company was going maybe about 18 months, something at this point, to help them scale, help them get technology ready to scale, because there were some scaling challenges with the tech, because it was the way an agency might build a project is not the same way as a scaling startup would do it. So some of the technical approaches weren't correct. So I was brought in to help get them to that scaling solution. And then they decided to really go all in on that and raise some venture capital to really invest into the growth of the business. So they got that first round of investment, and they made the decision to actually close down the branding agency, bring the staff over, and just go all in on Culture Shift. When I joined the business, it was £20,000 in annual revenue, annual recurring revenue. Now we're over £1 million in annual recurring revenue, and that's obviously the money that's been brought in to help the business to grow, obviously access that network that's helped them to maybe reassess some of the commercials and what a licensing model is and all that kind of stuff, and obviously getting the tech right to enable that growth, because in the previous what we call the version 1 of the system, that would not have enabled that kind of growth. So it's kind of getting those 2 things right, and that's the Culture Shift journey in a very small nutshell as to where we are today.
Wow, thank you. That's brilliant. And just one thing that stuck out there was the increase in your ARR that you talked about. Not only is it amazing as a business and a startup, there's clearly a demand for the product. It's also amazing because there is a demand for the product. Like businesses looking at, well, I know it's like universities as well, right? And but people just looking at, okay, is there an issue here? Let's try and fix it.
Yeah,
that's quite, it kind of restores your faith a little bit. And yeah,
absolutely, yeah. So we are, starting in the university sector, they're still the largest part of our client base. We're kind of trying to work, we're working with the NHS in a way to help get the system adopted there. We've landed a very, very large private sector accountancy firm that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about yet because they haven't quite gone live. It might have done by the time this podcast goes out, but it's a name you will have heard of. They're kind of the private sector. So what our strategy is, tackling this issue is a really brave decision that companies make. If they want to say, we recognize that bullying and harassment does exist in our workplace, that is an important step. If someone says to you, there's no bullying and harassment in my workplace, I'll show you a liar, because there definitely is. It might be very small in scale, but there'll be something there. And obviously then you get some very systemic issues. And there's press coming out all the time about how people are leaving through bullying, just have a look at what's happening in government at the moment, with all these MPs who've been accused of bullying and throwing tomatoes across the room and all sorts. And the people who are really brave enough to say, we want to build our workplace where people can get the most out of their team. People give the best if they feel safe at work. People are most creative when they feel safe at work and they feel in a team. So can you build that safe workspace by being really brave and tackling and shining that light on the bullying harassment that you'd rather didn't exist, but have to accept it does. And those are the partners we're working with now. There are lots of people out there who they aren't ready. They're not on that point of the journey. They don't know how to tackle it, so they'd rather stick their head in the sand. That's fine. We're not going to be able to work with everyone yet, but we want to bring people on the journey. So that's why we're working in the first instance with the people who are ready to go on that journey. work with them and get there.
You talk about people who bury their head in the sand and don't think that workplace bullying or discrimination happens. There was like 23% of the British workforce has experienced workplace bullying in some form, which is insane. Like, it's almost a quarter of people at work feel like they're being bullied.
Absolutely. And if you look at like other kind of intersectionalities, they're much higher. So like women, LGBT people, people of color, they will be experiencing that generally in a much higher amount than kind of the general population in general. If you want to get the best out of your work, you need to have a diverse workforce, because that gives you all those different insights. As we were saying earlier, that people who come into the tech industry with life experience, they add real value, because they bring in these different ways of thinking, these bring in these different ways of working, these different experiences. They all add into making a better product. That's true for businesses as a whole. So obviously, if you bring someone in who's got a different background in many different ways, or different life experience, they can bring in a different way of thinking, much more valuable experience that will help people, help businesses develop, something that can target the whole market, for example, or just have a much more creative workspace, so you just have a larger pool of ideas for which to draw from.
Yeah, absolutely. Alongside Culture Shift, obviously amazing, incredible business and amazing what you're doing. You also wrote a book, right?
Yes.
Which I don't know how you find the time, but it's called The Full Stack Developer.
Yeah,
is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I wrote The Full Stack Developer. It's published by Ep7, available from all good retailers. So that is the book I wrote. So I'll be very honest. I'm very honest about the story. So I was suffering from what was probably depression at the time, and I left my job. I was working for consultancy, and I decided. I went off a mental health leave, and I decided I couldn't go back, and I left my job. So I needed to do something. I needed to do something to fill my time. I couldn't just spend it at home. So I decided to start writing a book. So I left my house and I went to the Manchester Central Library, which, if you've never been, it's a wonderful venue. It's got this massive reading room with a big dome in the centre of it. It's a beautiful building. And I decided to write a book. So I started doing that, and then I got a new job. I went back to the BBC at this point. And then I said, well, just got a habit of every Saturday. I went to the Central Library and churned out another few pages. And over the course of about 2.5 years, got to the kind of my first draft getting complete, and decided to go pitch to a publisher. And they were very happy to take it on. Kind of got through that quite intense process of writing it, finishing it, proofreading. They had to change all the spellings to American. And it's like, oh.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. The book is kind of, I say it's the Full Stack Developer, but it really is the full stack. It's not just the full tech stack. It's everything you need to know to be a good, effective product team. So as a developer, you need to understand how UX works. You need to understand how QA works. You also need to understand how product management works. Maybe about DevOps and all those kind of things, as well as just, here's some JavaScript, here's backend, here's frontend, here's database. So I'd say it's about 50% of those kind of technical skills. So it's specifically full stack web development. Then it also includes like there's kind of like this is what you need to know about UX to make sure you can understand how UX teams work, etc. Has a chapter on ethics as well. I think that's something we don't talk about as much as an industry. If you look at traditional engineering industries like mechanical engineering, civil engineering, they all have codes of ethics kind of built into their professional working standards. We don't have that level of maturity as an industry. I don't know if we will get there, because that's maybe just not what the way of working is. But I think ethics is something we should be talking about. Are we doing actually making sure that the product we're building is not going to create any harm? And I think we have a professional obligation to not create harm. So that's why I included that chapter there. I always say it's the book I wish I had when I was a junior developer. That's what kind of was my frame of mind whilst writing it.
That's incredible. Yeah, because I've spoken to so many people, like hiring managers, that sort of thing, where, because we're massive about getting people into tech, because we have the Dev Launchpad initiative, obviously. And the big thing is always when people come in, sometimes they just don't know. They only know that one secular part of what they do. And surely having a good understanding of all parts is going to be so helpful. Yeah. And I love the code of ethics. That's such a great idea. Was that the main part of it, or was there other parts around it?
The actual ethics chapter is only about 4 or 5 pages, so
Right.
It's quite short. But I thought it was important to include it in there.
Absolutely.
And then the rest of it is just like, a lot of it's actually the history of the web, because actually I think to be a good web developer, people joke how JavaScript's a really bad language, and there are certain decisions that will certainly not be made the same way today. But you have to understand why those decisions were made at the time in order to say, okay, I now know why that was done like that. Therefore, I know how to use that feature better, or know how to avoid misusing that feature and avoid making mistakes. So I think understanding the history of how we got to where we are today in terms of programming language decisions, the growth of the web during the 90s, that influenced a lot of where we are today. But obviously that's very different. That was kind of this .com boom era. That's quite different to where we are today. But they have influenced what I think the technologies we use are, so we have to understand them.
Yeah, and it's so embedded in our day-to-day life now. Obviously, I know it's probably been said a million times, but even if I speak to my mum and dad, they're just, it must be quite scary. Looking at all this technology that you have no idea how any of it works, and it's so far from what you had when you were growing up. It must be quite scary.
Yeah, one of the things that really interests me is I done some volunteering in schools as this 7 Ambassadors scheme. Is kids don't know how technology works. They just have an iPad and they poke at it and stuff happens, but they don't know what's happening under the hood. So I think there's expectations the kids today, they use computers all the time. They must know a lot about them. They don't. They know how to use them, and that thing is kind of missing. Which is really, when I had that, it was a really interesting observation, because for me it was very natural for me to I want to know. Let's play behind the box. And going back to the BBC Micro, you could literally take the lid off and see all the microchips inside. You can't do that with a laptop anymore. And if they are, it's just one chip, because I think it's just so minimized and integrated.
Wow, that's such a great point. Again, I don't know too much about how the education system works at that early stage. Is there a big focus on computer science or anything to that?
I believe that there is now an increased focus in coding, especially. There's a big push for that kind of over the past 10 years. And there have been new programming languages invented that are specifically around education. So I know Scratch exists a lot.
Of course, yeah.
That gets used. It's kind of drag and drop, kind of gives you the principles of programming. But then I look back at what I did as a kid, and I don't know if you did Logo, which was this language, and you had a turtle, and we actually had a physical turtle. So pen down, it would draw, and that was programming, and it was so we did do programming even in the 90s.
Chris, you saying I'm a programmer? Am I a programmer? Yeah.
Yeah. If you've programmed Logo, then you've written a program.
I'll put that on my CV. 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh wow. Yeah, I was talking to my friend about this the other day. And we were trying to think of the name of it, and I was like, this turtle. I remember you would say if it went left and right.
Yeah.
And we didn't know the name, but
yeah, and then you could do loops, so we would do a spirograph type thing and all sorts. So yeah, it was all those kind of core programming concepts that I explored there. And I just remember it's really cool. I could make the turtle do things, and we're controlling a robot. That's amazing.
What do you because you mentioned before when you was trying to say you wanted to be a games developer, and you with your brothers, and you'd be trying to. And it was your job to code it, obviously. What do your brothers do? Are they in tech?
No, one of my brothers is now a history teacher,
right.
And my other brother is a joiner.
Right.
So yeah, quite different.
Yeah, mix of skills.
Yeah.
But all started from the games development, It must have been. So you've got Culture Shift, obviously, massive part of your life. The book that you wrote, which again, incredible. You're also part of Lib Dems.
Yes.
I don't know how you found the time. What's your official title?
As of yesterday, I actually just won an election. So I'm now part of the Liberal Democrat Federal Council, which is one of the bodies that is in charge of kind of scrutinising and keeping the main group of the Liberal Democrats kind of on track and on mission. So that's kind of a small part. But what I'm really involved in is our campaign in Manchester. So I work with our councillors. We've got Councillor Alan Good in Ancoats and Beswick. So I live in Ancoats, and I'm one of the campaigners there, and I actually stood last May in the elections. It was 98 votes short of winning, sadly. So yeah, but that's the kind of, it's very, very different from tech. You're really out there helping people on the ground. A lot of it is kind of, supporting people. A lot of people felt like they might have been forgotten by the council and the Labour Party who are in charge there. Obviously, feel abandoned by the Westminster government where the Tories there. And I think one of the things that we Lib Dems do best is a real focus on local issues and working really hard for our communities. We live there. We want to have the best for it. So we go out. We do a lot of working with people, for example, who are in housing association homes that might have mould or repair issues, and just put pressure on the housing associations to chase up outstanding repairs that might have been outstanding for 6 months. People turn to us when they don't know who to turn to. I had a phone call a few days ago from a lady who was in tears because the council were chasing her, sent bailiffs because she had an outstanding parking ticket. She's like, the only money I've had is the money I was going to put on the electric meter. It's going to run out tonight. And she was in tears. I don't know what to do. Do I do this? I'm going to go to prison. But I can't not have the electric because the kids are coming round. And I was like, okay, well, speak to the counsellor and we'll see what we can do. I think that's the point where, either, I don't know if it was cancelled or certainly got, because she was given a payment thing to do. But people, it's so different from the world of tech. The world of tech is all about, leveraging the scale of what you can do. But you have to remember the people. And actually, these are the problems that are really hard to scale, right? I think a lot of people who want to get into politics, they want to say, I just want to go be an MP and I want to have the big debates in Westminster. But reality is that, certainly standing as a Lib Dem, I think we won't have a majority in government for a while, if ever. So we get really involved in our local community, and then we're helping these people, and it's really rewarding to be able to do that. And also, I believe in what the party stands for. I think, one of the guiding missions of the Democrats is to remove oppression, and oppression in any form, really, to give people the freedom, liberalism, the freedom to be who you are, who you want to be. Obviously, as a trans person, that's something that's really important to me. We're under quite a lot of media scrutiny, negativity in the press. The Tories, backtracking on commitments to protect our rights. The fact the party have had the best track record, not a perfect track record, but one of the best track records on standing up for equality, is something that I'm really proud of, and that's why I'm part of that party.
Wow, incredible! Yeah, he got so much going on. It's you could talk about this for ages. But that's incredible, and congratulations on winning the election. That's such an awesome thing to say. So cool. I just won an election. Yeah, right. Amazing. So I know we kind of went off Culture Shift a little bit, but what are the plans for Culture Shift in the next kind of 6 to 12 months? Have you got anything that's going on?
Absolutely. So we're really growing as a company in Culture Shift. We've actually got a few jobs out now. So some sales roles. We've got a senior developer we're trying to hire for. All the details on the Culture Shift website. We hit 1 million. We want to get to 2 million, and 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. So we kind of got this aggressive growth plan. We're building a team to get there. We want to really get out into the private sector. We want to get out beyond just the universities, which is still the majority of our work. So, obviously, safe campuses, a really important mission. But safe workplaces, and, especially if we can really have the same kind of impact in the NHS that we've had in universities, I think that's really important. I think you hear a lot of talk about how people in the NHS are under a lot of stress. Bullying is rife. Bullying often happens when people are under pressure. People will fall back into that position. So can you tackle that and actually protect our health services? There's many challenges with the NHS at the moment. I think it's worth fighting for, and that's an example of how you can build that and solve some problems. And obviously, everyone deserves to be able to make a living in a safe way, where they're not being bullied, not being harassed at work. And we're building out our team. Obviously, we're looking for partners. So if anyone's listening to this podcast, they are the kind of company that says, well, yeah, we are brave. We do want to shine a light on maybe bullying harassment in our company, so we can solve it, so we can tackle it, so we can be proactive in doing this and getting the best out of our employees. And it will give you that competitive edge. We reduce the staff turnover, so slightly puts you out of a job if people are recruiting less because people are leaving less.
We can edit this out, don't we?
But yeah, so that's what we want to do. So we want to build that world. So if anyone out there is listening, just drop us at the line. So go to www.culture-shift.co.uk, can book a demo with one of our sales team, and they'll take you through and give you the full detail system. And generally, one of our we're not a charity, we are a commercial startup operation. But people partner with us because we reduce their costs, right? We are much cheaper than having to fight a discrimination case in a tribunal or something like that. So if you even just reduce one of them every 5 years, you've already made your money back, and you've made yourself a better way to work in the progress. It's a win-win situation. So yeah, we just need more people to come along, and let's work together to build this. And that's why we don't call them our customers, we call them our partners, because we do think it's a journey we all go on together.
Sure. No, absolutely. And we'll make sure we put the link and everything in the post when this goes out, obviously. 2 more questions and I promise I'll let you go. So you're obviously you're a very inspirational person. I mean, you've done so much with your life and I'm sure there's plenty more to come. Is there anybody that you've crossed paths with in your career that you kind of owe a lot of that to? Is there anyone that you would shout out and be like, they made a big impact on where you are today?
Yeah, there are definitely a few people who I'd say has made huge impacts on where I am today. I think most people I've worked with will have helped shape me, and that might be, for example, my very first manager, my very first job, Tim Fernando. I've kind of lost track of where he is now. I know he left to go do a startup somewhere in London, so this was in Oxford. He kind of like was a very inspirational manager. Had a very clear vision. He was a really good person to work with. For my technical skills, technical training, I was working with people like Simon Scarf at the BBC and many other people I can't remember who they helped me on that graduate scheme and get to where I am and help develop those technical skills. People like Rosie Campbell, who is a very close friend of mine. She now lives in Berkeley and she works for OpenAI as a technical program manager on AI safety, which is a really interesting field to be in. How do you make sure that if we do invent artificial general intelligence, it just doesn't turn into the Terminator? It's really, really hard problem to solve, but it's obviously kind of important. Those kind of people have made a difference, and obviously my family as well. My mum and dad, who I was adopted, and my parents really have shaped me into who I am today, and I've always been very, very thankful for that. My Auntie Jane, who's sadly now passed away, she, in my childhood, was very ethical, valuable woman, and that was really great. And also, like, even my ex-partners, so my ex Lena, she introduced me to kind of a slightly more radical form of activism than I was used to. I'm not like a red flag raving socialist by any means, but I do think activism is really important to making a difference in the world. So all these people, and there's many more I haven't mentioned, they are really are. I really am the sum of all those people around me who've we developed together and maybe gone different ways and come back together and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, all these people are really, really valuable to who I am today.
Incredible. Well, it sounds like some of those people won't be on LinkedIn, so it's going to be tough to tag them, but we'll if we can. And look, last question, and again, I'll let you go. If today was your last day on Earth, and apart from being on this amazing podcast, obviously, and spending time with your family, what would you be up to?
I would be absolutely stuffing my face with food. I love food.
Good.
But no, I would just be completely hedonistic, to be honest. If this is my last day of work, I would be just enjoying it and making the most of it.
Love it. I love it. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing speaking with you, and excited to see culture shift over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we'll catch you on the next one.